As the fighting raged across Europe, the nation of Switzerland was in a rather unique position. Their neutrality allowed them to remain a separate entity to the Axis and Allied forces, and they were mostly untouched, but not completely. Although they kept up strong defences along their borders as a deterrent and made it clear to Germany to hold them back, trade was blockaded by both the Allies and by the Axis, and the country was at various points bombed by both sides of the war. In the case of the Allies, supposedly accidentally, even as it remained independent and meditated between the two. While Switzerland was never actually invaded by Germany, such plans were definitely in place, and aggression from the Axis power steadily increased. The Swiss military strategy involved in retreating into the remote Alps to fortify well-stocked positions called redoutes, where they planned to launch a campaign of attrition and withdrawal should the Germans actually decide to invade Switzerland. It is against the backdrop of rising tensions and looming death in this land of pristine mountain peaks and breathtaking views that our story here takes place. The tale comes from a man who says his grandfather was there and revolves around a company of British soldiers he claims were tasked with providing reinforcements for the Swiss forces, and who in the winter of 1943 ended up stationed at a remote mountain village of only around 500 people. It was extremely isolated, with the men unable to establish reliable communications with the Swiss forces, and also having problems with communicating with the locals, as only a few of the men spoke German. The situation was made somewhat more complicated when a blizzard supposedly swept through the region, to leave them surrounded by high snowdrifts, blocked roads, and essentially trapped out in the middle of nowhere. With the last lines of communication damaged and no contact with the outside world, despite this new predicament, and the troops' captain decided to uphold their mission, keep an eye out of any enemy activity, and defend the village at all costs. As the weeks went on, the winter became fiercer, compounded by the fact that the location of the village between two sweeping walls of mountain meant that the sunlight only touched upon here for a mere few hours a day. It was in this gloomy atmosphere of biting cold half-darkness and snapping winds that the strange things began to happen. Around the tide men, villagers began complaining through a translator that since the British troops had arrived there had been weird things going on. Objects had gone missing from the houses, including some tarps, wood, and other more valuable items like a ceremonial halberd that one of the villagers had kept above his fireplace. The captain asked his men if any of them had been culprits, but everyone insisted that they hadn't stolen anything. Although the situation was getting stranger and stranger day by day, it would all even get more so when an actual child from the village goes missing. The villagers apparently launched a massive search for the child, but found no trace of him at all. At first it was thought that the boy must have just met with someone on accident or went out exploring. After all, some of the terrain was rather treacherous and the winter was ferocious. But then another child went missing, and then another. The terrified locals began to think that there was perhaps a wild beast of some sort prowling the wilderness, or a pack of wolves snatching up their children, although they did not get a glimpse of anything out of the ordinary. The children continued to disappear, and one night, one of the British soldiers disappeared as well. When a man called Private Reginald vanished right from the barracks, this made things a bit more ominous. Villagers began to think that some evil supernatural force might be behind it, creeping down out of the mountains at night to do his grim work. Some of the soldiers even thought that it could be some dark play to do with the Axis forces, but nobody really knew anything just yet. With the children and soldier being missing and the talk of monsters or wolves lurking in the shadows, that the men hunkered down to try and figure out what was actually going on here, with some of them convinced that it was just work of villagers trying to frame the British troops, while others thought it was a ravenous wolves or some other animal, the unusually harsh winter, or just plain bad luck. They decided to keep up their vigilant patrols, but more children disappeared right under their noses, further fueling rumours among the villagers of an evil terror terrorising them day and night. By the time spring began, there would have been a total of 7 children missing and still no sign of Private Reginald. Then during one nightly patrol, something strange would happen, and the witness's grandson says of this: "It was some time past midnight, around about 12:15, when my grandpa and his comrades noticed a figure peering through the bedroom window of one of the villagers' houses. My grandpa was at the opposite end of the street, so at first a figure looking through the window didn't see the patrol. My grandpa and his comrade decided to yell at the prowler, and it immediately tore itself away from the window and began running away. Everyone in the patrol was certain that it was somewhat was behind the disappearance and the break-ins of the missing children and the missing comrade Reginald. They ran as fast as they could to pursue through the melting snow and ice in the dead night, screaming at whatever it was to stop. They kept running and running. As soon as they found themselves on the outskirts of the village, there the snow was still fairly deep, the figure jumped into the ground. It looked like it had vanished into the air at first, but the patrol grew closer and they realised that the prowler had actually just jumped into a cave that had been hollowed out in the side of the snowdrift. The bewildered soldiers ringed the entrance to that frozen cave to peer into the impenetrable dark below, not knowing who or what was crouched down there in the black, but they were soon pushed back by gunfire and flashes erupting from the dank depths of the cave. The startled patrol staggered back, readied their own weapons, and in unison fired wildly down into the cave, blindly blasting away until they literally ran out of ammunition in their magazine. The returning fire ceased, and the icy air was filled with silence and the smell of gunsmoke. One brave man who lowered himself down into the cave soon came out, scrambling back out, shouting in disgust and horror. The rest of the curious men asking, "What do you see?" And the teller of the story says, "My grandpa took out his flashlight and shined it into the cave. When he saw the gruesome explanation behind the strange occurrences in the town, the figure that they had been chasing was actually their comrade Reginald. He also said the smell in the cave was like something he had never smelt before. The private who had gone missing weeks before had actually been shot by him and his comrades, right through the heart. The cave was not only occupied by Reginald, but also the bodies of 7 partially eaten children laid there, either due to the stress of being snowed in all winter, living near in constant darkness, or some sort of terrible mental issue. Reginald had gone completely insane and begun breaking into the villagers' houses and snatching their children from their homes in the middle of the night. He had used the halberd that had gone missing. Reginald had completely chopped up the bodies and slit the throats of the children and hid them in the cave in the snowdrift. It is pretty difficult what to make up of this tale. Not only its setting against the backdrop of a remote mountain corner of the grid of civilization, with all of the dramatic flair of the cannibal prowling about as the snowstorm boxes the troops in, but it all really only comes from one witness who says this happened to his grandfather. It is a second-hand report told decades after the fact, and so one wonders if this is just a telltale or the ravings of a mind ravaged by war in misty, mostly forgotten past. Whether any of this is true or not, it is no less bloody and horrible than a lot of the other atrocities going on around that time, and it seems to be a strange little tale that mostly forgotten, one among many of our fierce history of killing ourselves, overshadowed by bigger, bloodier things.